The cultural exchange project was assigned on a Monday, which Starlix was already prepared to dislike on principle. He sat in the third row of Classroom 7 in Unity Station 7's multi-species education block, which accommodated 14 students from 9 different species and operated on the shared understanding that nobody would eat anyone else's homework. It was, by most accounts, a functional classroom. Starlix was, by most accounts, a functional student. He paid attention. He completed assignments. He received marks that his clan elders acknowledged with the particular nod that meant adequate but not distinguished, which was his species, way of saying they expected more and always would. He was Cathar. He was also the only Cathar in the class, which he had long since stopped thinking about directly and had only started thinking about again now because the assignment written on the display board in front of him read, Cultural Exchange Project, select a foreign medium of entertainment. Research its history, cultural significance, and impact. Present to the class. 10 minutes minimum. Starlix looked at the board. Around him, his classmates were already murmuring to each other. The 2 Velhari students in the front row were discussing something in their own language, gesturing with their secondary arms. The Drevani cub beside him, whose name was Mox, and who had never once been unkind to Starlix but had also never gone out of his way to be kind, was writing notes with focused efficiency. The 3 Prelian students in the back were, as always, communicating through the faint bioluminescent pulses along their dorsal ridges, which technically violated the no-side conversations rule, but which the teacher had given up enforcing because she couldn't read Prelian and preferred plausible deniability. Starlix had no one to murmur to. He looked at the board again. Foreign medium of entertainment. The Cathar had entertainment. They had the combat sagas, which were long oral narratives about famous battles and clever strategies, performed by specialized speakers who trained for years to master the cadence. They had the silence plays, which were exactly what they sounded like, and which non-Cathar consistently failed to understand. They had instrumental compositions designed to be felt through the bones rather than heard through the ears. All of these were his. He could not present on his own culture. The project said foreign. He thought about what he knew of other species' entertainment. He knew the Velhari had elaborate dance traditions. He knew the Drevani produced mathematical art that supposedly induced altered states in susceptible neurologies. He knew the Prelians had something called the deep chorus that required 47 participants and 3 days to perform. None of it sparked anything in him. He copied the assignment into his personal log, packed his materials, and decided to visit the station library. The library would have resources. The library would have options. The library was a reasonable, productive destination for a Cathar cub who needed to research foreign entertainment without embarrassing his delegation. He set off down the corridor with a sense of purpose that lasted approximately 4 minutes, at which point he heard laughter. It was coming from behind a residential door in the civilian quarter he was cutting through, which was a permitted route, but not one he usually took. He would not have taken it today except that the main corridor was undergoing maintenance, and the detour had been posted since last week, and he had simply forgotten. The laughter was not the polite social laughter he heard in common areas. It was uncontrolled, repeated. It built, and then subsided slightly, and then built again, as if something was continuously generating it. Starlix stopped walking. He stood in the corridor and listened. He could hear, beneath the laughter, voices. A recording of some kind. Multiple human voices, speaking in a rhythm that was not quite conversation, but was not quite performance either, with pauses that seemed deliberate and intonations that rose and fell in patterned ways. He stood there for longer than he intended. Then he knocked. The laughter stopped immediately. A moment of silence. Then the door opened, and a human woman stood in the frame looking at him with an expression that moved through surprise and landed on curiosity in about half a second. She was young, younger than most humans he encountered in official capacities, with dark hair pulled up in a way that suggested she had started the day with it more organized, and it had since asserted its own preferences. She was wearing clothes that were very clearly not station issue, a loose shirt with text printed on it that he didn't have the context to read, and her expression had settled into something open and slightly amused. "Hi," she said. "I heard laughter," Starlix said. "That's usually a good sign," she said. He considered this. What was the recording? She tilted her head slightly. "You want to know what I was watching?" "Yes." She looked at him for a moment with the assessing quality that he had noticed humans used when they were deciding something. Then she stepped back from the door. "Come see for yourself," she said. Her name was Cecilia Vargas. She had been on Unity Station 7 for 8 months, working in the Cultural Affairs Administrative Office, which she described as being primarily concerned with scheduling conflicts and very long emails. She said this with the tone of someone reporting a minor inconvenience they had fully accepted. Her quarters were small and had the specific character of a space occupied by someone who owned more things than the space was designed for. There were prints on the wall, images he didn't recognize, text in human languages, what appeared to be a preserved playbill of some kind in a frame. Books, physical ones, stacked on every horizontal surface. A blanket that had been thrown over the back of the couch with the studied carelessness of someone who had actually arranged it that way. On the screen, the recording was paused. 4 humans stood in a domestic interior, a room inside a dwelling, he could tell, with the particular over-furnished warmth of old Earth architecture. They were frozen mid-expression. One of them appeared to be in the middle of a complaint. "What is this?" Starlix said. "It's called Everybody Loves Raymond," Cecilia said, settling back onto the couch with the ease of someone resuming a familiar position. "It's a television comedy from Earth, late 20th century. It's about a man named Raymond who is a sports writer and his family, and the fact that his family is a complete disaster in very specific and recognizable ways." Starlix looked at the frozen image. "It is humorous." "Extraordinarily," she said. "Sit down. I'll start from the beginning of an episode." He sat. Because the alternative was to go to the library, and the library would still be there. She started with the episode where Raymond's mother rearranges his wife's kitchen without asking, which Cecilia explained was a foundational episode for understanding the central dynamic of the show. Starlix watched it without speaking. He did not laugh. He was aware that he was supposed to, in the same way he was aware when music was meant to be solemn, not because he felt the intended feeling, but because he could see the structure designed to produce it. He watched Raymond's face when he discovered what his mother had done. He watched the wife's face. He watched the mother's complete absence of awareness that anything was wrong. He understood the mechanics, expectation violated, social rules transgressed, the audience positioned to see all parties simultaneously, which none of the parties could see themselves. "You're thinking very hard," Cecilia observed. "I am trying to understand why it is funny," he said. "What have you worked out so far?" He considered. The mother believes she is helping. The wife knows she is not. Raymond knows the wife is correct but cannot say so without upsetting the mother. Everyone is performing a version of the situation that is different from the actual situation. Cecilia pointed at him. "That," she said, "that is exactly why it's funny. It's the gap. The distance between what people say and what they mean, what they do and what they intend, what they think is happening and what's actually happening." She pulled her knees up, settling in. "Raymond is caught in the middle of all these gaps all the time, and we laugh because we recognize it. Every human alive has stood exactly where Raymond is standing." Starlix looked at the screen. "Does the Cathar have something similar?" Cecilia asked. "Situations where everyone understands something except the person who should." He thought about this for a moment. "There is a tradition in our combat sagas," he said slowly, where the overconfident general gives a speech before the battle that the audience knows he will lose. The speaker performs the speech with full honor. The audience carries the knowledge of what is coming. Cecilia stared at him. That's tragic irony. It is meant to be instructive. It's also the same structure, she said, just aimed at a different feeling. She reached for the remote. Watch another one. He watched 4 episodes that evening. By the third, something had shifted. He still did not laugh the way Cecilia laughed, which involved her entire face and occasionally required her to pause the recording. But he found himself anticipating, leaning forward slightly when Raymond's father entered a scene, because the father's particular combination of honesty and total indifference to social consequences was, he had determined, the most structurally reliable source of comedic rupture in the show. And there was a satisfaction in seeing it operate that he recognized as something adjacent to what he felt when a combat saga's strategy revealed itself cleanly. After the 4th episode, he said, "I have a school project." Cecilia looked at him. "Tell me about it." He explained the cultural exchange project. He explained that he was the only Cathar in his class. He explained, with somewhat more difficulty, that he had been standing in the corridor unable to think of a subject that meant anything to him, and that this was when he had heard the laughter. Cecilia was quiet for a moment when he finished. She had the expression she got when she was thinking seriously, which was different from her thinking about something funny expression in a way he was already learning to read. "Earth comedy," she said, "specifically sitcoms, specifically the domestic family sitcom as a vehicle for social observation." She looked at the screen. "That's a real topic. That's a real piece of human cultural history. There's legitimate academic work on it." "Would it be a sufficient subject?" he said. "It would be an extraordinary subject," she said, "if you do it right." She looked at him. "Come back tomorrow, we'll start properly." He came back the next day. Cecilia had, in the intervening hours, produced what she called a syllabus, which was a list of materials organized in a sequence designed to build understanding progressively. It began with the origins of comedic performance in human culture, moved through the development of theatrical comedy and its social functions, arrived at the invention of broadcast television and what it meant for comedy to enter the domestic space, and culminated with the golden era of the family sitcom, of which she argued Everybody Loves Raymond was the finest example. She also told him on the second day that she had been what humans called a theater kid. "Explain," he said. She leaned back in her chair with the smile of someone accessing a very specific category of memory. "There are humans who, from a young age, are drawn to performance, to theater, to comedy, to the idea of standing in front of people and creating a reaction. We spend our childhoods in school plays and drama clubs and summer programs. We are usually very annoying about it." She paused. "I was very annoying about it." "You no longer perform," he said. "I perform," she said. "There's a community improv group on the station. We meet twice a week." She looked at him with a particular quality of attention. "You should come." He looked back at her. "I'm a Cathar warrior cub." "Yes," she said. "And improv is about reading a situation instantly, responding without a script and making a partner look good." She tilted her head slightly. "Those sound like warrior skills to me." He had no immediate counter to this. The community improv session was held in a small performance space in the civilian arts wing, which Starlix had passed many times without going in. There were 11 humans and 2 Velhari in attendance, plus Cecilia, plus Starlix, who stood at the edge of the room and observed the warm-up exercises with the focused neutrality of someone conducting reconnaissance. The exercises were strange. People said words in a sequence, each building on the last. They enacted scenarios without preparation, inventing as they went. They made offers to each other, a gesture, a word, a suggestion of a thing, and the other person accepted the offer and built on it rather than rejecting it. That's the first rule, Cecilia told him quietly. Yes, and you never shut down what your partner gives you. You take it and you add to it. He thought about this. In the combat sagas, a general who rejected a scout's report without consideration was always the one who lost. You build from available information, he said. Exactly, she said. Now come and try it. He was, initially, not good at it. He was too precise. He made offers that were too specific, closing down possibilities rather than opening them. He occasionally forgot that the point was the reaction, not the outcome, and constructed scenarios that were internally logical but comedically inert. Cecilia corrected him each time without impatience, which he noted and appreciated. By the end of the session, he had made the room laugh twice. The second time, it was intentional. He walked back through the station corridors afterward in a state he did not have a precise word for. Not pride exactly. Not satisfaction exactly. Something that combined elements of both with a quality of aliveness that he associated with the moment in a combat exercise when the strategy clicked into place and the outcome became clear. He was, he thought, going to make an excellent presentation. The bullies found him on a Thursday. He was in the common study area adjacent to the education block, working through his presentation notes, when three of his classmates settled at the table beside his with the particular deliberate quality of beings who had chosen that table for reasons unrelated to its location. There was Dren, a Prelian whose bioluminescent pulses ran fast and bright when he was pleased with himself. There was Vorth, a Velhari whose secondary arms had an unfortunate habit of gesturing dismissively as punctuation. And there was a Dravani whose name Starlix had never learned because she had never previously spoken to him directly, which made her presence here feel immediately purposeful. "We heard you've been spending time in the civilian quarters," Dren said, "watching old human broadcasts." Starlix looked up from his notes. "Yes." "Human entertainment," Vorth said, with both sets of arms contributing to the dismissiveness. "Comedy. Isn't that what Cathar warriors do, study comedy programs?" "It is what I am doing," Starlix said, "for the Cultural Exchange Project." "We're doing the deep chorus," Dren said, which was technically bioluminescent preening. 3 days, 47 voices, ancient tradition. He looked at Starlix's notes. "You're presenting on a show about a human family. About the structure of human comedic performance and its social function across 3 centuries, Starlix said, using the show as a primary example. "It's embarrassing," the unnamed Dravani said flatly. "A Cathar studying jokes." Something moved through Starlix's chest that was familiar and unwelcome. It was the feeling he had learned to recognize over 2 years as the only Cathar in his class, the specific pressure of being seen as a category rather than an individual, the expectation that he perform his species rather than himself. He had managed it over time by being very good at assignments and very quiet about everything else. He was about to be very quiet now, the way he usually was, when the door to the study area opened and Cecilia walked in. She had said she might stop by to review his outline. She had a bag over one shoulder and her customary expression of someone moving through the world with opinions about it. She took in the tableau at the tables with a single glance that Starlix recognized as the improv-trained read of a room, and she pulled out a chair and sat down beside him with the ease of someone who had been expected. "Who are your friends?" she said to Starlix. "Classmates," he said. "Great." She looked at the 3 of them with a bright, open expression that Starlix had already learned to identify as the performance of friendliness in the service of something else entirely. "What are we talking about?" "They find my project topic embarrassing," Starlix said. "Embarrassing," Cecilia repeated as if trying the word out. She looked at Dren. "What are you presenting on?" "The Prelian deep chorus," he said, with the bioluminescent equivalent of pride. "Oh, that's beautiful," Cecilia said with complete apparent sincerity. 47 voices, right? Ancient tradition, very impressive. She let a beat pass. How long have you been studying it? Dren's pulses shifted slightly. It is part of my cultural heritage. Right, Cecilia said. So you've known it your whole life. It's yours. She looked at Starlix. Starlix came to this material as a complete outsider. No shared heritage, no cultural framework, no built-in understanding. He had to learn how comedic structure works, why it works, what it does for human society, how it evolved over 3 centuries, and how to perform it himself. She tilted her head at the 3 classmates. Which of those projects requires more actual effort? A silence. Vorth's secondary arms were notably still. Also, Cecilia added, and her voice dropped just slightly out of the bright register and into something more direct, making a Cathar feel embarrassed for engaging with something that took courage to engage with is a very specific kind of cowardice, and I think you all know that. She picked up Starlix's notes and looked at them as if the conversation was over. The outline looks good. I think the section on comedic timing could be expanded. The 3 classmates left within 2 minutes. Starlix watched them go and then looked at Cecilia, who was still reading his notes with apparent, genuine interest. You did the thing, he said. What thing? The gap, he said. You complimented them sincerely, and then the compliment became the argument against them. She looked up with a slow smile. Yes, and, she said. He was quiet for a moment. The thing in his chest that had been unwelcome was still there, but it had shifted, the way the pressure shifts when something has been acknowledged and no longer needs to be carried alone. They are not wrong that it is unusual, he said. A Cathar studying comedy. No, Cecilia agreed. They're not wrong about that. My elders value distinction, he said, but they have a particular picture of what distinction looks like. Most people do, she said. She set down the notes. Here's what I've learned from doing improv for 12 years. The funniest people in the room are never the ones who are the most comfortable. They're the ones who got knocked sideways by life in some specific way and learned to find the angle in it. She looked at him. You're the only Cathar in a 14-student multi-species class on a space station, studying a 300-year-old Earth sitcom for a school project. You have more angles than anyone in that room. She tapped the notes. Use them. The day of presentations arrived on a Tuesday, which Starlix had decided to approach differently than he had approached the Monday when the project was assigned. He sat in the 3rd row and watched his classmates present with the attention he gave to everything that mattered. The Prelian deep chorus was represented by a recording, because 47 voices were not available, which reduced its impact somewhat. The Velhari dance tradition was presented with genuine passion by both Velhari students and was genuinely beautiful. The Drevani mathematical art took 11 minutes and produced in Starlix a mild sensation behind his eyes that might have been the altered state or might have been the overhead lighting. He watched all of it with care, because these were real things his classmates had brought, and they deserved attention. Then it was his turn. He stood at the front of the room and looked at 14 faces and 1 teacher, and he thought about Raymond standing in the gap between his mother and his wife, and he thought about the overconfident general in the combat saga who gives his speech while the audience knows what is coming, and he thought about Cecilia saying you have more angles than anyone in that room. He began. He talked about the origins of comedic performance in human culture, tracing it through theatrical traditions and into the domestic comedy broadcast and explaining why bringing comedy into the home changed what comedy was allowed to be about. He talked about the specific genius of the family sitcom, the closed ecosystem of known characters, the renewable premise, the way the audience's familiarity with the characters became the instrument the comedy played. He talked about Raymond Barron and what made him work as a character, and he talked about the gap, and he talked about how every species that has ever lived in groups has a version of the gap, because every species that has ever lived in groups has had to navigate the distance between what is said and what is meant. He talked for 14 minutes. Then he said, "I would like to conclude with a demonstration." Cecilia came in from the corridor, where she had been waiting, and stood beside him at the front of the room. They had rehearsed the scene 12 times. It was an original scene, not a reproduction of an episode, written in the structure of the show, domestic, specific, grounded in recognizable social tensions, with one character who believed she was being helpful and one character who knew she was not. Cecilia played the character who believed she was being helpful. Starlix played the character in the middle. He had been worried, in the days leading up to this, that he would not be able to do it in front of an audience. Improv in a workshop with people who were there to practice was one thing. Performance in front of his class was another. What happened instead was that the audience laughed at the second line. He had not expected that. He had expected to wait longer to build more, to earn the laugh over several exchanges. But the second line landed, and 14 faces responded, and something happened in his chest that was entirely new. A lightness that expanded outward, warm and immediate and completely unlike anything in the combat sagas or the silence plays or any entertainment his people had ever produced. He wanted to do it again immediately. He did not, because the scene had a structure and the structure mattered. He followed it to its conclusion, which was the moment where his character finally said the thing he had been avoiding saying for the entire scene, in a way that was both completely honest and completely useless because it was approximately 3 exchanges too late, which was exactly how it worked in the show. The class laughed at the ending. Starlix stood at the front of the room in the aftermath, and the teacher was writing something in her evaluation file, and Cecilia was beside him with an expression he had no difficulty reading at all. He received the highest marks in the class. The elders were informed that evening, through the standard academic reporting channel that the delegation maintained for students in the education block. Elder Varath, who had been the primary source of the particular nod that meant adequate but not distinguished, read the marks and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Highest marks." "Yes," Starlix said. "In the class." "Yes." Varath was quiet. He looked at the academic report. He looked at the notation the teacher had added, which read, "Exceptional engagement with cross-cultural material, sophisticated structural analysis, memorable presentation, recommend for advanced cultural studies track." "You presented on human comedy," Varath said. "On the structure and social function of human comedic performance," Starlix said, "with a practical demonstration." Another silence. Varath set down the report. "Adequate," he said, which was not what he usually meant by it. The station's Council for Arts and Culture contacted Cecilia 6 weeks later. The inquiry was formal and somewhat careful in its phrasing, as if the council was not entirely sure how to officially request what it was requesting. It noted that the cultural exchange presentation given by a Cathar student and his human collaborator had generated an unusual amount of discussion in the education block and beyond. It noted that several residents had expressed interest in a live comedic performance event. It inquired whether the parties in question would be interested in developing original material for a station-wide live showcase. Cecilia read it 3 times and then called Starlix, who came to her quarters and read it once. "Yes," he said. "We'd have to write it," she said. "Original material, not Raymond, ours." "Yes," he said again. She looked at him. "You understand that means we'd be performing in front of the whole station. You told me the funniest people are the ones who got knocked sideways and learned to find the angle," he said. "I have many angles." Cecilia laughed, and it was the uncontrolled kind, the kind that had first pulled him out of the corridor and into everything that followed. "Yes," she said, "you do." What came next became, in time, difficult to summarize briefly. The sketch show ran for 2 seasons before it became something more, a touring production, then a recorded series, then a piece of cultural history that scholars argued about and students studied and audiences across 14 systems watched in their own domestic interiors, in the way that audiences have always watched comedy, which is to say alone or together, recognizing themselves in the gap between what the characters said and what they meant. The Cathar, who had always had the combat sagas and the silence plays, added something new to their canon. It did not replace what came before. It sat beside it, in the particular way that new things sometimes find their place not by displacing the old, but by revealing that there had always been a space for them, waiting. Elder Varath, who lived long enough to see the first season, watched the premiere in the delegation common room with 7 other Cathar, and said nothing throughout. At the end, he made the nod. Not the adequate one. A different one. Starlix, who was watching from across the room, recognized it immediately. He did not say anything about it. He was Cathar. They did not say things like that out loud. But he thought about it later. Sitting in Cecilia's quarters with the familiar blanket on the familiar couch and an episode of Raymond on the familiar screen, and he felt the thing that had no precise word in his language, the warmth that expanded outward and had nothing to do with temperature, and he decided that if he were ever going to write a word for it, it would be something close to the word for sufficient, but larger. Much larger, like it had always been waiting to grow.